Here's the fourth game from Prep Test 56. It's the Executive Tours game. It asks us to take 5 executives, assign them to 3 site visits, and put those site visits in order. So we've got multiple tasks going on at the same time. This is a hybrid game. And when you work on hybrid games, you want to keep in mind what are the core tasks and what would those core tasks look like individually. And oftentimes that can help you with the setup of a hybrid game. Let's start with the ordering element here. We can simply just drop down 3 site visits, F, H, and M, into a number line, numbered 1 through 3. But now, how do we assign the 5 executives to those 3 site visits? Assigning 5 executives to 3 site visits is a lot like open grouping, since we don't know exactly how many executives are going to be assigned to each site visit. When we are dealing with open grouping, we're obviously going to use the open board, where we'll create slots for every potential character that can go into that team and a box for every required character that must go into that team. So if you already know what's the maximum number of executives that could be assigned to any one team, great. Continue on with the recording here. But if you don't, I want you to pause the recording now and think about what's the maximum number of executives that can be assigned to any one site visit. If you came up with 3, awesome. So how'd you come up with 3? Well, one way to think about it would be to take an executive and drop it into one of the site visits, and then take another executive and drop it into another one of the site visits, and ask yourself how many executives are remaining for that last site visit. So if we put Q into 1 and R into 2, that would leave us with S, T, and V to drop into the third site visit. So we'll box out the first slot for each column. We'll put 3 slots available for each column. And at this point, we've got a pretty good game board for tracking the information we need as we move through this game. So let's move on to the rules. The first one tells us that the site visit for F must precede the site visit for H. Let's use a relative constraint where F precedes H, something like this. And given that we can, deal with M at the same time, let's go ahead and just create a cloud, put F preceding H inside of that cloud, and make sure that we remember that M needs to go in here somewhere. The second rule tells us that the site visit for F includes exactly 1 executive. But this one's tricky since we don't really know where the site visit for F is going to be assigned. It could go first, it could go second. We know it's not going to go third. But since we don't know exactly where F is going to go, we probably want to deal with this constraint or this rule off to the side next to our notation for F. Remember, it's a good idea that when you're dealing with notation that you try to make it as visually similar to the way it'll appear on the game board as possible. It helps you recognize where chunks can go or where characters can go or how they're going to be slid into the game board. So we can simply just put a box above the F, put a slash above that. That way we know that there's going to be exactly 1 executive going to wherever F is ordered. The third rule tells us that the site visit that includes Q must precede the site visit that includes either R or T. We know that Q is going before R and T. To notate this, let's use a relative constraint, a partial tree, Q preceding R and T. What this does not tell us, however, is whether R or T are together or individually assigned to separate site visits. The last rule says that the site visit for S is not after the site visit that includes V. Well, that doesn't tell us whether S actually precedes V, because V and S could be assigned to the same site visit. So let's just go ahead and say what's not possible. That way, everything else we can consider possible. Now that we've got the rules set up, we may want to pause and think about how this game is limited. There's a couple of things that we might have our attention drawn to. If you don't see any way in which the game is limited, I want you to pause the recording and think about it for a second. There's a couple of forks in the road that one might consider checking out to see if they lead to further insights. One thing you might consider is, where can Q be assigned? We know that Q can't go third. We know that R and T can't go first. And since Q has to have 2 players behind it, it might seem like a good idea to think about where Q is being limited to. Q can go first, it can go second, it can't go third. So that's one way. Another way is where F and H are limited. F can go first, F can go second, but F can't go third. And you might consider creating frames based off either of those scenarios. Because this rule over here involves F, it probably would be more fruitful to create frames based off of the F, and it would look something like this. One scenario would put F first, and then we could slash out the two slots above the box in the F column. We could do the same if we put F into the second site visit, but we can get a little bit more information here than we could in the last one. Here we can additionally infer that H would go third and that M would go first. So there's a couple of ways in which the game is limited. Neither way seems to get us to a whole lot of new information. Let's revert back to our basic game board and hit the questions.